Okay, so good morning, everyone. I think we'll make a start now. My name is Cheryl. I'm a key relationship manager at Lawyer Checker. I'm sure most, if not all of you will know Lawyer Checker, but for those of you who don't, Lawyer Checker was set up in 2013 to work with law firms to offer them the best protection via enhanced due diligence reports in relation to your fund transfers. Thank you for joining our joint webinar this morning with Searches UK. This webinar is aimed at reviewing the current position in the market as we head into 2021 and to think about how this is currently impacting on the level of fraudulent activity in the sector. So hopefully over the next half an hour or so, I'll be able to give you some food for thought on some of the actions you need to be considering when it comes to mitigating risk and how best to ensure your teams can continue to process transactions in the safest way possible over the next few months. So there we go. So a quick look at the agenda then for this morning. Firstly, we'll do a quick review of the current position of the market. There's lots of factors to consider, in particular when it comes to thinking about how this impacts fraud in the sector. And then that leads us nicely onto what are we seeing when it comes to fraud. At Lawyer Checker, we're quite lucky because we have quite a good insight daily into fraudulent activity. And I think it's important that we reflect on this information and we utilise it to our advantage. Next, I'll talk to you a little bit about the Lawyer Checker service. So the account and entity screen search is very well known in the sector. Many of you will have had a go at using it at some point, either in your firm now or you might have used it previously. And I really want us to drill down into what are the benefits of the service and why it's important that you have a think about what kind of due diligence you're doing, and that you need to have a think about that right away as well. We're then going to review what the regulators have said recently, both in their risk outlook and in their thematic review. And to finish off, I will run through some cybersecurity top tips. So these are just going to be a couple of things that you should be doing right away to help you patch up any vulnerabilities in your firm. Okay, so let's get started. So, I mean, it's scary to think really, isn't it, that we're nearly a year since we went into our first lockdown. Lots has happened, since then, and we now find ourselves in our third lockdown, which just seems crazy. The level of property transactions in the market currently is very, very high. Of course, that's been accelerated by the stamp duty holiday and the deadline. And heading into 2021, we are now very much in that final stretch coming in up to the stamp duty deadline. And this is creating an enormous amount of pressure on conveyancers to get people completed in time. Now, the average conveyancing time at the moment is taking around 22 weeks, which basically means that anything instructed post October 26th is at risk of not meeting this deadline. And it's safe to say that that is quite a significant number of transactions. So I think one of the main things and the broad message that we're getting at the moment from the sector is that level of pressure that you're all currently facing. It just simply isn't sustainable, really. Now, from conversations I've had with many of you, the market seems to be fairly split on whether you guys want an extension to the deadline or not. Some see an extension as almost delaying the inevitable, and ultimately you might be worrying about the mental health of your teams if an extension were granted, because you have been working incredibly hard for so long now. But the other half of you want an extension, or you want a tapering off to the deadline to help ease the immediate pressure that your team is currently facing. But unfortunately, there is still no cyber extension, so we do need to prepare ourselves for the deadline and to set client expectation the best we can for them. There's also lots of new startup firms in the market, and we've seen a few big mergers and unfortunately some firm closures. So it's important that we're keeping an eye on external businesses that we work with and that we're staying updated on the state of that business and how it might impact our transactions. And it's also important that we have a think about how does all of this activity then impact the level of fraud that we're seeing in the sector. So what I've done is I've pulled out some really key stats from the SRA thematic review, which I really think hone in on the risks we're all facing at the moment. And if you haven't read this, I would highly recommend that you do. It's a really interesting piece and an overview of fraud at the moment, generally in the sector. Now, in the thematic review, the SRA ran an audit of 40 law firms. 30 of those law firms claimed they'd been a direct target of a cyber attack, with the remaining 10 firms claiming that their clients had been a direct target of a cyber attack. So this is an issue which faced every single firm audited, and it's clearly something that shouldn't be ignored or put on the back burner at the moment. Now at Lawyer Checker, we've done some of our own research, and we've seen a huge spike in the number of scam alerts coming from the SRA in the last few months. In fact, 1/5 of all scam alerts occurred in 1 month of last year, and 50% of all scam alerts last year occurred in the last 3 months, which is just really scary. This isn't down to any kind of seasonal spike. If we look at the same figures from the previous year, this is just due to a variety of reasons. Home working, in itself carries its own level of risk. And the conveyancing market is very, very busy, and there is that pressure, and people are bound to make mistakes. And this kind of pressure is something that fraudsters are also very, very aware of. So this is driving Friday afternoon fraud, but I think it's fair to say that this is a risk which is now being presented week-wide now. We also know that fraudsters have built up large cash reserves over the lockdown period, and they're keen to start business again. So this is something you need to be cautious of. I think when we're thinking about fraudsters and I'm referring to fraudsters, it's important that we keep in mind that I'm not just talking about the odd individual, who's sat in their bedroom, typically trying to hack, that kind of stereotype that you might be thinking about. I'm actually referring to full-on businesses. They work out of airplane hangars, they spend all day, all night doing this stuff, they work shift patterns, they get holiday leave, same as you and I. So they themselves are always looking for ways to try and intercept your transactions, and the methods that they're using are getting more inventive and more clever. Something else that the SRA noted was that there was a clear lack of understanding from directors and partners on basic cybersecurity policies. And this is lack of understanding and clear reliance on outsourced IT was ultimately frowned upon, and can in itself present a high level of risk, which also needs addressing. But ultimately, as I say, this is the perfect market for a fraudster. We've got a large majority of people working remotely, meaning that these people are isolated from their usual protection of their office environments. If you're working alone or you're returning to work from home back to the office, you're having to make judgments on matters without guidance from your colleagues. This is going to make you an easier target. And obviously you might, have just recently joined a firm. We're seeing lots of activity and job roles going up for conveyancers at the moment. So you might be joining a team who ultimately are already under a lot of pressure to move cases forward faster. And so you might be inclined to rush to move things forward before the deadline. But it is super important that your due diligence on the other side is thorough and that you feel like you know who you are dealing with. Ultimately, you must be satisfied that you understand the firm that you're working with before you send client money anywhere, and that has never been more important. Okay. So now we have a better understanding of the impact 2020 has had on the level of fraudulent activity in the sector. What I'd like to do now is share my 5 top tips on how you can protect your firm and your transactions, and what I believe is best practice when dealing with an external business. So my first top tip is to make sure you carry out thorough due diligence on the other side. We're now working in a market where unfortunately firms will go into administration. So this is there's also an increased level of cybercrime and fraud in the sector. So even if you feel like you know the firm well that you deal with, you never truly know what is happening in the background. This is also important even if you send money to a firm regularly. The market at the moment is very, very volatile. Lots of things can happen in a very short period of time. So it's always important that your due diligence checks are completely up to date. And when I say completely up to date, I mean literally by the minute. My next top tip is to have a plan when transferring funds. So having a plan enables you to adopt a consistent approach, and a consistent approach is my third top tip. So it seems logical to combine these two together as they are linked. But by having the most up-to-date information to hand when it comes to a firm and the level of risk they present to your transaction, you can be sure that you're able to make a well-informed decision on whether you're going to send client money to them. This should be for every single transaction, not just for some and not others. Now, we truly understand that you're all incredibly busy and you're under a lot of pressure at the moment. And ultimately, you will be looking for areas that you can cut corners and save yourself some time. But enhanced due diligence is not one of these areas. It is vitally important that you are carrying out thorough due diligence on every single file. And I think the key thing to know as well, in particular in relation to consistency, is the conversation that you're then able to have with your insurer. So you're in a much stronger position when you're telling your insurer what you are doing, rather than then asking what you should be doing. So having an evidenceable, consistent approach to due diligence allows you to paint a really strong external picture on how serious you take your due diligence, how careful your team works. And this is a really, really powerful message. And I think that brings me nicely then onto my next top tip, which is obviously keeping evidence of due diligence on your file. It's all good and well saying that you carried it out or that you made a phone call, but you must be able to demonstrate that with evidence, because ultimately when the SRA come into your firm in a few years' time and they pull out a file from the lockdown period and they ask you what due diligence checks did you carry out on the firm, saying, oh, I think I might have phoned them before I sent them money, isn't quite going to cut it. You need to have some tangible evidence on your file that says, this is the information that I had on the firm, and this is how I was able to make my decision as to whether I was going to send money over to them. And then my final top tip is to acknowledge human error and that mistakes do happen. So we've spoken about how your team is going to be stretched very thin at the moment. You're all working incredibly hard to get through the transactions before the deadline, but it is really vital that you've got a robust process in place to pick up, on any errors that the team might make generally before funds are sent. People are busy, mistakes are bound to happen. So it's important that you've got a robust process in place just to kind of safeguard you from any issues that might occur. And I think this is really important as well, particularly because you've got people from home. You might have junior staff working from home who are working unsupervised. You've got new staff that might not necessarily be familiar with your processes and policies at the moment. But if you're really consistent in your approach, you're clear what due diligence checks your firm should be doing, and everyone's working from the same page, it helps you to create that really safe and secure culture when it comes to enhanced due diligence. Okay. So this is where the Lawyer Checker service fits into all of that. So as a business, we want to make your jobs easier for you, and the Lawyer Checker service aims at making that best practice as achievable as possible for your team. Now, many of you will be familiar with the Lawyer Checker service. As I say, you might have used it previously in another firm, you might use it in your current firm, or you might not have used it at all, but it is very well known across the sector and is recognised by the SRA as being a really valuable tool for enhanced due diligence in fund transfers. Now, back in October, Lawyer Checker carried out their 1 millionth search, which just goes to show really how robustly tested and market proven the service is. And it's currently used in 1 in 4 conveyancing transactions in England and Wales. Now, to categorise what the Lawyer Checker service does, I would split this into 2 important parts. The first is that it verifies the bank details of the law firm acting on the other side of your transaction. Now, our very unique database, which we've built up over a number of years, will tell you whether or not the bank details you hold for a firm have a good and successful track record of usage in conveyancing. This kind of footprint is really important when determining the level of risk the bank details present to you. The second part of the service is the enhanced risk reports on the firm itself and potentially the lawyers within the firm. Now, I touched on earlier the importance of gathering the most up-to-date information on the firm itself prior to sending client money to them. And our enhanced risk reports collate this kind of information for you and help you to have a full picture of the firm you're dealing with so that you can make a really well-informed decision as to whether you're going to send client money to them. Now, the Lawyer Checker reports are the only reports on the market which use live, real-time data to collate further research for you on a law firm. These are inclusive, of course, of a bank check. But one of the most important parts of the service, I feel, is our direct API to the SRA. Now, our direct API enables us to inform you in real time of any scam alerts, notices, and conditions that come from the SRA which may impact on your transaction. So rather than having to go and look for this information yourself, this information is presented to you within our reports. And it's never been more important, really, that you have this kind of information prior to sending money to a firm, in particular, of course, following the huge spike in scam alerts towards the end of 2020 and heading into 2021. It's really not enough, to be honest, to be ignorant to the information and to claim that you didn't know something when it ultimately goes wrong. You need to be able to make a well-informed decision and have that information before you kind of send money over to another firm. And we've also spoken about how the market is very volatile at the moment, and we're seeing lots of startups and mergers and closures. And with this comes new bank details and risk. So this is why we've also included a credit safe check within our search to ensure that the business itself remains active on the day that you intend to send money. It's highly unlikely that you're truly going to know what's happening in the background of another firm, and you don't want to be caught out in a situation where you've sent client money to a firm which has since then closed down. So again, our enhanced report collates all of this information for you. You're then able to make a really well-informed decision on whether or not you are going to proceed. Okay, so let's just take a quick look then at how the Lawyer Checker searches work. The information that we actually need to be able to carry out a Lawyer Checker search on a firm for you is very, very straightforward. We, of course, need the bank details that they've supplied to you so that we can do a quick check on them and determine whether or not they've got a good footprint of usage within conveyancing. We need the firm's name, their SRA CLC number, their postcode. You can pop in your case reference number. That's just so you can relate your Lawyer Checker result back to the correct case file. If you pop in your proposed completion date, that enables us, let's say something really significant happens and you need to know about it right away before you exchange, we can pick up the phone and call you about it and make sure that you're aware of it. And you also pop in the transaction type as well. So that's residential or commercial. Obviously, Lawyer Checker can be used for both types of conveyancing. And then what you're going to do is you're going to submit that through to us. That's going to produce an instant result. Now, there's three types of results that you can get from a Lawyer Checker search. The first is a frequent, the second is infrequent, and then we've got unknown. So frequent means that we've seen these bank details previously. They have a really good track record of use in conveyancing, which means lots of firms have carried out searches against these bank details before. They've got a history of use within conveyancing, and we believe they relate to the law firm. That should mean that ultimately this is a bit of a green flag for you. It means that you should feel comfortable about proceeding with sending money to that law firm. But as you can see there, just from my example, we've got frequent with a notice. So even if the bank details themselves are frequent, we do still supply information to you that might be important. So let's say, for example, we've got a firm that have frequent bank details, but they've recently had a scam alert released on them in the SRA. We're still making sure, even on these frequent results, that you're getting up-to-date information and risk alerts that you should be aware of. The second result that you can get is an infrequent. So obviously this means that we have seen the bank details previously, but we haven't seen them very often. And in this case, we think that you need to have more information about the law firm itself before you decide whether or not you're going to send client money to them. And that's the same with an unknown result. So unknown, of course, means we have no record of these bank details before, they have no track record of use. That should be a little bit of a red flag, but it doesn't necessarily always mean that it's something bad. It could just be, for example, that it's a new startup firm and they've never carried out conveyancing before. But either way, we think you need to be aware of what's going on there. So if you were to receive an infrequent or an unknown result, that automatically triggers our further research reports, which are carried out by our in-house team. And obviously the objective of the team here is to help build up and collate that information for you on the law firm itself, so you really have a clear picture about who it is that you're dealing with. And there's lots of different databases that we look through there. So just pulling out a couple as an example, we're going to take a look at whether or not the firm itself is SRA or CLC. Are they CQS or Lexel accredited? Land registry transfers of value. So what we're looking at there is how many purchase transactions has the firm done in the last year. So using an infrequent as an example, an infrequent result, you might have just got an infrequent result because the law firm that you're dealing with on the other side is a small law firm and they don't carry out much conveyancing. So it could be something as simple as that. We take a look at things like Google search and Street View, which I think is important, particularly at the moment whilst we're all working remotely. Does the firm appear to have any kind of office or sign that is visible from the street? Do they have a website? I mean, the list goes on. And I think, as well, the important thing and the really thing that I want to kind of highlight to you, the two things I want to highlight to you are the SRA scam alerts and notices that you need to be aware of that are really on the increase at the moment, and also the credit safe check as well. So whether or not the business remains active, not closed down or anything like that. And that obviously then returns a further research report back to you. So if you receive an infrequent or an unknown result, we highly recommend that before you continue with your transaction, that you do wait to get this further research back, and that you read through the further research thoroughly before you make a decision. We always get that further research back to you within 4 working hours. We've never taken 4 hours before. It's usually about an hour and a half. But it just means that once you've got that further research back, you then have that second layer of evidence on your case file as to what steps were taken from your point of view as to making the decision on whether or not you're going to send the client money over. So when do we recommend that you carry out the lawyer checker search? So we always recommend that you carry out the lawyer checker search very early on in the transaction, so it applies to requisitions on title. The reason that we recommend that you do it early on is so that the further research reports and the results do not cause any delay on the day of completion. So let's say, for example, you carry out a lawyer checker search and your bank details come back as infrequent. We then obviously recommend that you wait for your further research report before you proceed with the transaction. If you were to complete that on the day of completion, you then run the risk of the further research report causing delay, and we would not want that. So it's really important that you carry out the lawyer checker search really early on, the second that you get the bank details from the other side. And it's also important that you carry out the check very early on because of that enhanced due diligence. So let's say, for example, you do end up dealing with a law firm that presents a high level of risk to you, or you think that it might be a fake law firm. I think you'd much rather know at the very start of the transaction than, when it's 22 weeks later after you've done all of that work, to then find out at the end that you're dealing with someone fraudulent. And by carrying out the lawyer checker search, of course, you're helping to build up that evidence on your case file, which I spoke about earlier, and I'll speak about again, how important it is that you're building up that paper trail of evidence on your case files. So we recommend that you build lawyer checker into your standard process. And when I say standard process, I mean you should be using lawyer checker as a standard in every single conveyancing transaction. We are proven to work. Ultimately, our service and our results are designed in a way that your regulator, insurer would want to see, and it covers everything they want to see when it comes to enhanced due diligence. I touched on earlier about how consistency is key, particularly when it comes to security enhanced due diligence. And I think that really is incredibly important at the moment when we're not working from an office and you've got team members who are working remotely and on their own. Everybody does need to be working on the same page, because it's when we run into situations where you have somebody who isn't doing what everybody else is doing, that is where the gaps are in your armour, that is where the fraudsters are going to identify, and that's where they're going to intercept. So by having a lawyer checker search on every single transaction as standard, you're leaving no area to run at risk effectively. Now, if you don't use lawyer checker on every transaction, let's say you use it on some but not others, what you then miss out on is the live data and the benefit of the direct API to the SRA. So as I say, the lawyer checker service is the only report on the market that uses live real-time data to collate information on law firms. That is both on our frequent results, infrequent results, and unknown results. If you decide to kind of do it on some and not others, you're going to miss out on that live data. And ultimately, it's so important that you have all of the up-to-date information before you send money anywhere at the moment. And also, you're a trustee of that client money, so why wouldn't you carry out the appropriate due diligence every single time before you send money to somebody else? Why would you take the risk on someone else's money but not others? And also, if something went wrong, how would you then explain this decision to the SRA? If you are consistent in your process and you're clear in your process, it helps you build up a much better compliance story to your insurer if anything were to go wrong. I also think it's important that we have to think about why you should be thinking about this right now. I understand that you are all incredibly busy and you're very tired and you're feeling stretched, but that is the exact reason that you need to be thinking about these kind of checks and making sure that you're safeguarding yourselves and your team from any mistakes. And it only really takes one for it to be catastrophic. So that's why you need to be thinking about it now. There's a huge spike in SRA scam alerts, so we can see that there's lots of fraudulent law firms out there that you could be dealing with. There's going to be a lot of human error because your teams are very tired, so we want to be able to safeguard against that. And implementing something like Lawyer Checker is really, really easy. It requires very little input from your team. We have an API that helps you integrate this kind of stuff directly into your case management system. So things like that, we can make this process really easy for you. And ultimately, either way, it doesn't matter how you're kind of doing this due diligence, because everybody should be, even if you're not using Lawyer Checker. If you are doing it manually, that must be taking up quite a lot of time. So using something like Lawyer Checker just kind of outsources this kind of due diligence and takes some of the pressure off that your team might be facing at the moment when it comes to carrying out these kind of checks. Okay. So I think it's also important for us to quickly have a think about some of the information coming out of the SRA at the moment, in particular with regards to cybercrime and cybersecurity. Now, I spoke earlier about the level of fraudulent activity that the SRA thematic review highlighted in the 40 firms audited, and there were 40 firms reporting a cybersecurity incident. So, it's a very real threat. And given that lots of us are now working from home and this presents a much higher level of risk, the SRA are really honing in on what firms are doing to mitigate the risk. And they're taking a look at what proactive steps are being made to protect firms and their staff. And one thing which came out both in the thematic review and the SRA risk outlook was that many firms have an over-reliance on outsourced IT businesses for their cybersecurity. And often the outsourced IT businesses aren't necessarily legal specialists. So therefore, the relationship itself might not be fit for purpose. And your outsourced IT business, their understanding of just how much risk is out there for a law firm is also lacking a little bit, because potentially to them, you're just another client. So the SRA has endorsed in both instances Cyber Essentials Plus certification as something firms should consider when carrying out regular risk assessments of the firm's exposure to cybercrime. So I thought it'd be good for us to quickly take a look at what is Cyber Essentials Plus. So Cyber Essentials Plus is a government-backed scheme which is recommended as being a good level of cybersecurity for businesses. The Cyber Essentials Plus certificate includes a third-party audit which identifies any vulnerabilities in your network and systems and ultimately helps you to patch these up. Now, as experts in cybersecurity for law firms at Lawyer Checker, we have our own in-house assessor who certifies law firms to this standard. And over the last year, we have seen a huge U-turn in the market in firms wanting to become certified. Now, the third-party audit really helps you test that relationship between your firm and your outsourced IT to make sure that it is fit for purpose and that your IT team are covering the areas that they need to when it comes to your security. Now, particularly IT people, they tend to like to use quite techie jargon, which is quite difficult to understand. So the certificate can really help you ensure that they're doing everything they should be when it comes to security. And I think, you know, when we think about audits and things like that, we know that you audit your accounts and we know that you audit your files. So why wouldn't you audit one of the most important parts of your business, which is your cybersecurity? And we have certified a lot of firms to this standard, and every time we do, we always find vulnerabilities that need patching. So if Cyber Essentials Plus isn't on your agenda, I would make sure that it is at your next board meeting, because you're better off, you know, someone like Lawyer Checker finding these vulnerabilities over someone else finding them. So what's the process to become certified? So this is fairly straightforward. You will complete basically like an online questionnaire that will run through some questions around your current network and setup. This is then marked by the Lawyer Checker Cyber Essentials Plus assessor, and we'll book in your audit date. Given that we are obviously all currently working remotely and we're in the pandemic, we'll do this audit remotely. We will identify vulnerabilities in your network, and as I say, every time we have done this, we have always found vulnerabilities, so it's well worth doing, and our assessor will help you patch those vulnerabilities up. And then ultimately you become certified to the standard. And once you're certified, you can use the Cyber Essentials Plus branding. You can put it on your website, you can put it on your email footers to show your clients that you're serious about protecting them and their data, but also to show other firms that you're working with that you're serious. And I think, and again, one of the key benefits to consider around Cyber Essentials Plus certification is the story you're able to sell to your insurer. Being able to say that a third party has come in and audited what you're doing from a cybersecurity viewpoint and passed you to the Cyber Essentials Plus standard is a really good thing to be telling them. It really helps you paint that picture around how serious you are about your cybersecurity. Okay, and then I think to finish off then this morning, I just want to quickly run through some of my cybersecurity top tips. And of course, my first cybersecurity top tip is going to be to get your firm Cyber Essential Plus certified. Don't get left behind. So many firms now are doing this. It's certainly on the cards as a project for 2021. I wouldn't delay doing it. There is a huge risk, particularly with an over-reliance on outsourced IT people. Just make sure that you bring some of that responsibility back in-house and carry out the appropriate audits. And Cyber Essentials Plus is a really useful tool to help you do that. My next tip is to make sure that the computer is on the most up-to-date operating system. So don't use any kind of Windows operating systems that have run past their support life and they have no security updates, because this puts you in a really vulnerable position when there's no support functionality. And this is something that viruses and criminals will actively target as well. So just make sure that you're on the most up-to-date operating system with your tech. My next one then is to use strong passwords and also to avoid using the same passwords for personal and work devices. Now, I appreciate that this is a really difficult thing to do, but we've certainly seen attacks this year where it's clear that a criminal has accessed work-based systems by using personal passwords. This is a really easy route in for criminals to take, and quite often one they will do. We understand that passwords are quite difficult to remember, and obviously we don't want people writing them down. And it's only natural that you will try and use different variations of passwords you've used already. So you have to look at, as a firm, what you can do to help people with some of these challenges. And one thing that we use in Lawyer Checker is like a password manager. If you check the National Centre for Cybersecurity website for a password manager buyer guide, there's some really good ones on there. But at Lawyer Checker, we use something called Keeper. I think it's very user-friendly and it's easy to use. And you might also want to consider educating people on the 3 random words technique. This helps make passwords far less predictable and significantly harder for a criminal to guess as well. So it's super easy technique to remember, and it just might help get your staff and your passwords up to date and safe. My next tip is to make sure you shut down your PC every night. So again, this kind of all goes towards making sure that your system has the regular updates that it needs and the security updates. It's something simple, but I think we've all been guilty before of just shutting the laptop lid and walking away for the evening. Make sure you are doing a proper shutdown every single night, because it just helps remove any chinks in your armour. And my last one, I think is a fairly obvious one, is just to be suspicious of emails. Emails is one of the core ways fraudsters is going to try and intercept communication, either between yourself and another firm or between yourself and a client. So make sure every single time you receive an email, particularly if there's instructions in it to do something like click on a link or send some money or release some data, just make sure that you're checking the email domain every single time, even if you think it's from someone that you know or someone from within your business. Because if you check it every single time, you're going to be sure that you are sending information to the right people on every occasion. Okay, so just to quickly summarize then what we've covered this morning, your team is going to be stretched. We understand that you're all busy and mistakes are going to happen, but that's why it's so important at the moment to have the appropriate due diligence checks in place and to make sure that everybody's working from the same page. And that goes into my next point, and that consistency really is key. Make sure that any unsupervised team members, any new team members are familiar with your policies and that everybody's up to date on what you should be doing. And this is going to enable you to progress cases forward safely. Carrying out due diligence on the other side is super important. The market really is full of fake law firms at the moment. So make sure you carry out your due diligence early on in the transaction, rather than spending lots of weeks working on something to find out that it's not genuine. And these kind of due diligence checks will obviously help you paint a really clear picture on who you're dealing with as well. Get your firm Cyber Essentials Plus certified. This is really important. If you've not thought about it before, you should be thinking about it now. It shows the regulator that you've taken active steps towards regular risk assessments of your firm's exposure to cybercrime, and that's really important at the moment. And of course, Searchers UK, we're partnered with Lawyer Checker, so they can support you to have a clear and documented due diligence process in place using the Lawyer Checker Account and Entity Screen service. So thanks so much for listening to me this morning. I hope that I gave you some useful information around what's going on in the market at the moment in relation to fraud, and how Lawyer Checker kind of fits into that, and how we can work with your teams to help you mitigate some of the risks that are occurring at the moment. Of course, if you have any questions at all around the searches or what's happening, feel free to get in touch with Samantha at Searches UK or myself. My details are up there on the screen, but I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you all have a great rest of the week, and hopefully speak to you all again very soon. Thanks very much.